Chapter 15. Lizard was writhing in pain on the icy ground between ruined buildings and the ice fortress when Lucas caught up to him. The sound of snow softly crunching under Lucas's boots caused Lizard to swing his head toward him. "Easy, Lizard," said Lucas. "Don't be afraid." It was clear that Lucas was out of breath. He leaned on the broken wall of a building as he watched Lizard. "Stay away," shouted Lizard. "What happened?" asked Lucas. "She put something inside me," said Lizard. "I didn't find any devices," said Lucas. "No," shouted Lizard angrily. "It's not a device." "Okay," replied Lucas calmly. "It's a creature," explained Lizard with air quotes. Suddenly, under some unseen influence, Lizard began writhing in pain again. "Doc was right," lamented Lizard. "She was trying to control me. I should have recognized it and let him heal me." "I wish he was here," said Lucas. "I'm not sure what to do." "Don't come close, Lucas," shouted Lizard. "It's telling me to kill you." "Well, I can't just leave you here like this," said Lucas. "Yes, you can," said Lizard as he leapt to his feet. Sensing the danger, Lucas gripped his key and his eyes began glowing. Lizard rushed toward Lucas, and though Lucas avoided the full force of the attack, he was still knocked back as he attempted to evade. "Get out of here, Lucas," shouted Lizard as he writhed on the ground, clutching his head. "I can't fight it." Lucas began backing up, but then noticed visible airwaves surrounding them. He realized his divine key was giving him information, and he paused to watch. "I don't want to hurt you, kid," said Lizard as he began crawling toward him. Lucas turned away and ran. The sound of Lizard thrashing around on the ground was disconcerting, but Lucas knew what he had to do. As he ran, he reached back into his pack and pulled out a radio. He popped the back off of it and began to tie wires together. "No!" shouted Lizard as he began crashing into the walls of the buildings. He was fighting the commands it was giving his mind, but without great success. Lizard spun around and spotted Lucas, who was still tweaking the hardware in his radio. Lizard forced himself down to the ground, but control of his body seemed to be slipping from him. His legs began moving quickly. He tried to throw himself back so that his balance would fail, but it seemed his body naturally corrected. He rushed toward Lucas. He knew that Lucas was already out of breath, and there would be no way he could stop himself. To his surprise, Lucas rolled into a ball and evaded Lizard's lunge. "Sorry, Lucas," said Lizard. "Just a bit longer," said Lucas as he pressed wires together. Lizard tilted his head in confusion. He had no idea what Lucas thought he was doing with a radio. His body began slowly moving toward Lucas. This was bad. The slow, deliberate movements could not easily be avoided, but his body would soon be close enough to Lucas that he might harm him. "I don't know how you're going to get out of this one," said Lizard. Lucas did not respond, but diligently worked on his radio as Lizard slowly approached. The crunching snow beneath Lizard's feet grew closer and closer. Lizard was right behind him, preparing to punch his head, when Lucas stood up and switched the radio on. Lizard froze in place for a moment, and then he relaxed in a natural standing position. Lucas backed up nervously as his eyes stopped glowing. "You are a freaking genius," shouted Lizard with air quotes. Lucas laughed. "You still need to talk to Dr. Young, but I think you'll be okay for now," said Lucas with a laugh. He handed his custom-rigged radio to Lizard. "Here, strap this to your belt. The signal should keep the creature incapacitated." "Thanks," said Lizard as he attached it. "So now what? Should we get the key?" "There's a metal bunker toward the center of the fortress," said Lucas. "We need to get there." Lucas and Lizard began moving toward the middle of the fortress. The closer they got, the more frequently they ran into patrols in white cloaks. Fortunately, between Lizard's quick attacks and Lucas's shotgun ambushes, they were able to move fairly quickly toward their destination. "It's like they aren't paying attention to us," observed Lizard after he snapped the neck of an acolyte. He was right. The troops were distracted, or more accurately, focused on something else. Lucas frowned. Odds indicated that they were trying to pin someone down. Lucas could not tell if they had driven Victor and Kirana to this point, or Sig. He was also worried because they seemed to be focused on the bunker to which he and Lizard were advancing. The sound of machine gun fire caused Lucas and Lizard to pause. They looked at one another. The fire had not been directed at them. "Let's get to the top of that snowdrift," said Lizard, pointing to a steep hill. Lucas nodded and followed as Lizard scurried rapidly up the side. When they had reached the top, they saw dozens of white-cloaked acolytes firing on a metal bunker. In the door of the bunker, behind a makeshift barrier, Kirana and Victor returned fire. "Is that the place?" asked Lizard hopefully. Lucas nodded as he recaptured his breath. Climbing through deep snow had exhausted him. "Let's get down there," said Lizard enthusiastically. Started Lucas as he panted. "Hang on." Lizard sighed loudly. "Do you need me to carry you?" asked Lizard in a disappointed tone. Lucas shook his head and reached into his pack. He pulled out a reflective emergency blanket. "I don't think we have time for a nap," said Lizard. "Calm down, Lizard," said Lucas. He put his pack down on the slick blanket and then lied down on top of it. He then pulled the front corners up, creating a makeshift sled. Lizard smiled as he saw what Lucas was doing. "You really are a genius," he admitted. "I know," said Lucas with air quotes and a smile. "Give me a push." Lizard pushed him, and Lucas began accumulating speed as he flew down the slope toward the bunker. Lizard scurried after him. They went fast enough that the acolytes were unable to hit them. "That's Lizard and Lucas," shouted Victor. "Give them some cover." Kirana and Victor fired toward the groups of white-cloaked acolytes, diminishing the fire they received until Lucas crashed into the bunker. He leapt up and grabbed his pack, then rushed into the bunker. Lizard scurried in right behind him. Lucas sat down next to Jonathan, who was still unconscious. "Thanks for the cover," said Lizard. "Are you okay, Lizard?" asked Victor with a worried tone. "I'm fantastic," said Lizard with air quotes. "I've got a parasite inside me, but Lucas rigged a radio to keep it at bay for now." As he finished, a large firebomb exploded, pushing them back. "We need to get into the bunker," said Victor. "No," shouted Kirana. "Come on, Kirana," said Lucas. "Yeah," agreed Lizard. "This place is like an absolute defense." Kirana's eyes widened, but she did not move. "What?" asked Lizard. "There is no absolute defense," said Kirana, "and you shouldn't have come here. They drove us here. I should have realized what they would do." "What happened here, Kirana?" asked Victor. Machine gun fire forced them to take cover before she answered. It reminded her of that day when her home was destroyed. She had been running toward her home to meet her mother. Tears were streaming down her face, and in spite of the cold she could not slow down. She did not know how she was going to tell her mother that her father had died, or that the wall was being destroyed. She did not know what to do. Finally she had seen her home on the horizon. The flickering light of a fire shined through the window. Normally fire was a comforting thought, but after seeing her father get hit by a fiery boulder, it made her apprehensive. Her house was only a few hundred yards away when a firebomb fell onto it and exploded, leaving a burning crater in the ice. Though she had not wanted to break the news about her father's death to her mother, she would have rather done it 1,000 times than see her mother die. She screamed in pain and shock. Seeing the blast, several of her neighbors rushed out the door. When they saw Kirana screaming and chunks of wall being destroyed, they knew they needed to fall back. "Come, Kirana," they urged. Slowly she began to follow them as they rushed to the center of the compound. Confusion and fear had set in. People panicked as they dragged small children and elderly relatives, hoping to get to a more protected area. "We have to protect," shouted a man. He could not finish his sentence, because a firebomb exploded near him, killing him instantly. Kirana had heard several people talk about the need to protect, and she assumed they were talking about their children. Her father had died trying to protect her. It made her angry that her life meant his death, and she wished she could have traded places. She slowed down as others around her sped up and firebombs exploded nearby. She wondered what purpose she had to rush towards safety. Amid the blasts and confusion, she noticed the people pouring into a metal bunker. It appeared quite secure. She wondered why there were no metal bunkers on the wall that could have protected her father. She slumped to the ground in despair as she watched the men, women, and children of her community organize themselves and file into the bunker. Suddenly, red-cloaked acolytes appeared. They completely ignored Kirana and headed for the bunker. "We've got a surprise for them," shouted one of the acolytes as the villagers shut the door of the bunker. The acolytes lined up around the bunker and readied flamethrowers. They began shouting as they activated their weapons and heated up the metal on the bunker. Kirana's eyes grew wide with horror as the screams of people echoed in her ears. They were being baked alive. Tears poured down her cheeks when suddenly a snow leopard rushed past her. Its thick white fur was decorated with dark spots. Its eyes seemed to glow with focus as it honed in on an acolyte, jumped on him, and dragged him away screaming. The power and focus of the animal made Kirana stop crying. She knew at that moment what she wanted to do. She wanted to become the snow leopard. Victor's voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Kirana?" he asked. "They drove almost everyone inside the bunker. Then they used their flamethrowers to cook them alive," she said. Her voice was filled with disdain. "Kirana," whispered Victor sympathetically. "Kirana," shouted Lucas, "come inside." "But Lucas," protested Victor, "they've got plenty of flamethrowers. Couldn't they do the same to us?" "No," said Lucas bluntly. Kirana raised an eyebrow in confusion and reluctantly followed Victor as he pulled Jonathan inside. "This is a bad idea, Lucas," said Kirana with a frown. Lucas grabbed his key and his eyes began to glow. "No," said Lucas again. "This is a good idea. Shut the door, Victor." Victor slowly shut the door before a firebomb exploded. The memory of the screams she had heard from inside this place made Kirana shudder. "Are you okay, Kirana?" asked Victor. She nodded, but he knew that she was uncomfortable. "We won't let them get away with what they've done," said Victor reassuringly, "and we won't let them hurt Sig." Kirana wiped her eye and nodded as they followed Lucas. Lucas began walking to the interior as he pulled a flashlight out of his pack. He pointed the beam on a mark in the middle of the floor. "Kirana," said Lucas, "did they ever tell you why they built this bunker?" Kirana shook her head. "It was the only metal building in the entire complex," said Kirana. "It was out of place, but I never knew why." "Wait!" Realization of Lucas's implication made Kirana whirl around, looking for a sign to confirm it. "Are you saying that they were protecting a divine key?" Lucas nodded and smiled. "Do you know how to get to it?" asked Victor. "Well, yes," said Lucas. "What puzzles me is that it specifically requires the key of origins." He put his key into a small hole on the floor. There was a sudden burst of energy that threw everyone back. The ground began to shake as a stone pedestal raised itself up out of the floor. But before it got very high, Lizard shrieked and held his head. Lucas shined his flashlight at him. He was clutching his head and writhing in pain. The light also illuminated broken pieces of Lucas's rigged radio. "Oh, snap," said Lucas with a frown. Lizard leapt up and lunged at Lucas. Inside the mind realm, Jonathan walked around nervously. It had not taken him long to realize that Lizard had been under the influence of some form of mind control after he had regained consciousness. He felt as though he had been searching for Lizard for hours without any luck, but as he walked down a snowdrift, he suddenly saw Lizard reappear. "There you are," said Jonathan. He held his key tightly, and it became a long sword as his eyes began glowing. He rushed at Lizard. Lizard narrowly dodged. "You're faster," said Lizard. "I'm not faster than the real Lizard," said Jonathan as he swung again. "But then you aren't the real Lizard." "Are you sure?" asked Lizard. He rushed at Jonathan. Jonathan spun around, swinging his blade again and forcing Lizard to leap back defensively. "I'm more powerful than you," said Jonathan confidently. "Not here," said Lizard with a smile. Lizard rushed at Jonathan and threw a combination of punches and kicks, but Jonathan carefully blocked them with the broad edge of his sword, then lunged, stabbing Lizard in the gut. His eyes grew wide and his head tilted up. Suddenly a large, dark creature covered with eyes and tentacles crawled out of Lizard's mouth. "So the puppeteer is revealed," said Jonathan. "What exactly are you?" "I am called Parasite," said the creature, "and this is my domain. I have been in the mind realm far longer than you. You cannot defeat me here." Parasite began flinging globs of green goo toward Jonathan, but he leapt back to avoid them. He smiled as he readied his sword. As he charged toward his opponent, he was caught off guard by unnatural hands grabbing him from the piles of goo that Parasite had flung toward him. "You will not escape me," said Parasite. Jonathan swung his sword, but to his horror, the slime hands grabbed his blade and began creeping toward him. He squirmed, hoping to free himself, but every move seemed to accelerate the ascent of the Parasite's goo as it enveloped him. Jonathan turned to face Parasite, hoping to find a weakness. Instead, Kirana appeared next to Lizard's body. "Kirana!" said Jonathan. "What happened to him, Lucas?" said Kirana. "Can you fix that radio?" "Kirana!" shouted Jonathan. "What's happening?" "You have strong feelings for her," said Parasite gleefully. "I can sense your concern. It is even greater than the concern you felt for the one you call Lizard." "Keep away from her, Parasite," warned Jonathan. Parasite wrapped a tentacle around Kirana's neck. "You are in no position to make demands," chided Parasite. "You are powerless to stop me." Jonathan's eyes began glowing brightly. "I said keep away from her," shouted Jonathan. His entire body began glowing, and the goo that had been enveloping him bubbled and receded as if it were in pain. "Such passion," observed Parasite. "You will not hurt my friends," said Jonathan as he lunged at the creature with his sword. In the bunker, Lizard stood triumphantly with his hands around Kirana's throat. Victor and Lucas were unconscious on the floor, having fallen victim to Lizard's lightning-fast attacks. Kirana squirmed to free herself from Lizard's grip. "Pointless," said Lizard with a sadistic grin. Kirana's eyes grew wide with fear. Suddenly, Jonathan appeared fully conscious, with glowing eyes behind Lizard. She had forgotten that they had pulled him inside the bunker because he was unconscious. Jonathan grabbed the sides of Lizard's head. "You will not hurt her," said Jonathan. Lizard winced in pain. "You cannot stop me," said Lizard. "Watch me," said Jonathan. Lizard released Kirana and screamed in agony. Kirana slumped to the ground and choked as she caught her breath, but she kept her eyes on Jonathan's incredible display of power. "He is mine," shouted Lizard angrily. "The fast one belongs to me." "Not anymore," shouted Jonathan defiantly. Lizard's head slowly tilted back and his mouth opened. A tiny creature with tentacles crawled out of Lizard's mouth and fell to the ground. Lizard lost consciousness and slumped down. Jonathan's eyes stopped glowing, and he drew his sword and stabbed the creature. It let out a small squeal before becoming completely motionless. "Jonathan," whispered Kirana in awe. "Kirana," said Jonathan with a look of concern. "Are you okay?" He knelt down next to her and looked in her deep blue eyes. Kirana nodded. Jonathan hugged her. She struggled internally for several more moments, trying to fight the impulse to return the embrace. His strong arms were so comforting, and his affection was so genuine, that she finally wrapped her arms around him and held him close. After a moment, Jonathan pulled back. Kirana looked away awkwardly and cleared her throat. "The others," she said. "We need to get out of here. They're going to roast us in our juices." "What?" asked Jonathan in confusion. "We're in a huge metal bunker, and they've got flamethrowers," said Kirana. "Let's get out of here then," said Jonathan. He rushed toward the door. "Hang on," shouted Kirana. Jonathan did not wait. He began to open the door. A firebomb exploded just as the door began to open, pushing them back inside. "It's not that easy," said Kirana. "What should we do?" "The pedestal," said Kirana. They walked toward it and began to examine it. It seemed unremarkable to them, as if a wide block of the floor had been raised. There was no key, no mechanism, no plaque with words of wisdom, only a square section about 5 feet by 5 feet that had been elevated about 7 feet. Jonathan and Kirana began feeling the sides of the pedestal and then pushing to see if they could discover its secret. Eventually, one of the bricks fell back, revealing that the pedestal was hollow. "It's getting hot in here," said Jonathan as he wiped the sweat off his brow. "They don't have as many flamethrowers as they did when they first invaded," said Kirana, "but eventually it will be too much for us. We need to get through this wall." The two of them began pulling bricks out until large chunks of the side of the pedestal broke free. Kirana picked up Lucas's flashlight and shined it inside. As they looked down, cool air rushed up, and the light illuminated a spiral staircase leading to a lower level. They looked at one another and smiled. They worked their way down, carrying Lucas and Lizard to the cool shelter beneath the bunker. Jonathan went back up for Victor as Kirana looked around the new chamber they had uncovered. Though it was mostly empty, on the far side of the room there was a dusty altar. Kirana walked up to it and blew the dust off of the top, revealing a mirrored key. She looked around to ensure no one was watching, and picked it up. After a few moments of nothing happening, she frowned. Slowly, Jonathan made his way down the steps with Victor. "You found the key?" asked Jonathan. "Yes," said Kirana. "And?" asked Jonathan. "It must not be for me," she said. "It didn't do anything." "Well, maybe it's Victor," said Jonathan as he laid Victor down. Kirana placed the key on his hand, but nothing happened. "Probably Sig," said Kirana. "Well, speaking of Sig," said Jonathan with a smile. "You know where he is?" asked Kirana. Jonathan nodded. "There's a building to the west that they are using," said Jonathan. "They've got him strapped down. It looked like—" "Oh no," said Kirana. "What?" asked Jonathan. "We don't have much time then," replied Kirana. "They're going to try to boil his blood to sacrifice him to their stupid fire demon." "But we're stuck here," said Jonathan. Kirana looked at Lucas, Lizard, and Victor, who were all still unconscious. "They'll be okay," she said confidently. "Between your key and my swords, we can probably take care of the acolytes outside, but if we don't hurry, Sig West will die."